I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karras, and this is Resiliency Within. Today's show will address post-pandemic healing, learning, and well-being. In the last few weeks, as more and more people have been vaccinated in the United States, we are venturing out, meeting family and friends, and realizing at the same time that life will never be the same. My guests today, Heidi Williams Cooper and Lindy Settevendemie, began working together just prior to the pandemic with Emory University's Social, Emotional, and Ethical Learning Program, also called C Learning Program. C Learning is an innovative K through 12 education program, providing educators with the tools they need to foster the development of emotional, social, and ethical intelligence for students and for themselves. So Ms. Williams Cooper and Ms. Settevendemie work started as a collaboration, and they are true collaborators, to create a culturally responsive adaptation of the C Learning curriculum to meet the needs of the Kindezi Schools, community students and teachers alike. They have rich teaching backgrounds and a shared wisdom in ideas to guide us during this post-pandemic era from a vista of looking forward as they look back. They will explore how to use C Learning to cultivate well-being, promote healing, and support liberation as many of us move into post-pandemic mindsets. In saying this, I also want to acknowledge that for many people in our world community, the pandemic has not moved into a post-pandemic stage. And we just want to acknowledge that and know that there are many people around the world that are suffering right now. So with that, I want to continue and introduce and say a little bit more about our guests. So Lindy Settevendemie is a dedicated educator, equity-focused coach, and gifted international facilitator of social, emotional, and ethical C Learning. In fact, she and I got to co-host some wonderful children in India. And we were like, I guess we were co-Oprahs. And we got to interview some wonderful children about their experiences with C Learning. It certainly was one of the highlights of my life. And Lindy has been the project coordinator of C Learning at the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University since 2016. In addition to having co-written the K-8 curriculum, she plans and leads workshops around the world, serves as a liaison with U.S. school partners, supports new trainers, and leads the development of forthcoming high school curriculum. There's much more to say about Lindy, but you can go to our Voice America website and see a longer edition of your bio. And Heidi Williams Cooper serves as a senior director of culture and community wellness at the Kindezi Schools, where she supports educators and leaders' professional development, manages and cultivates partnerships, and prioritizes positive organizational health and wellness. Heidi also is a social, emotional, equity consultant, C Learning facilitator, yoga and meditation instructor. Oh my goodness, they are so lucky to have you, and grounding expert for listening for justice. And I really would like you at some point to tell us a little bit more about what that means to be a grounding expert for listening for justice. And as an elementary educator and former assistant principal, Heidi has mentored and coached educators with a holistic lens that understands the importance of truly seeing each student, recognizing and cultivating the individual gifts that each of them brings, elevating their voices and preparing them to lead choice-filled lives. And just from my conversations with her, she has so much spark inside of her that I know she's going to share with us today. So as we start, what is on your mind? And I'm going to start with Lindy. So Lindy, what is on your mind as we're starting today?
Thank you so much, Elaine. What's on my mind is I'm a little bit nervous being here interviewed live on Voice of America, and so honored to have been invited to your show and with Heidi Williams Cooper, one of my favorite collaborators. What's on my mind is I feel really hopeful about where we are in our experience of the pandemic in the U.S. And I also acknowledge and honor what you said about many people in the world not being post-pandemic yet. I feel hopeful for the work that Heidi and I are doing together, and that we will continue to do together with C Learning and other things for students and teachers in the Atlanta area.
And right now we need hope. And I think that C Learning is that I think it's like there's seedlings that are planted all over around the world and wonderful trees are growing as a result of C Learning. So Heidi, how about you? What's on your mind right now?
So, first of all, thank you, Lindy, for the invitation, and Elaine for inviting me to be a guest. And like Lindy, I also am a bit nervous. So, I'm using all my strategies right now. But
I know you both have lots of skills to help
yeah,
teach you.
what's on my mind is preparing teachers, leaders for returning to the building in full capacity. And have we thought through structures that foster well-being? Have we provided resources that cultivate the same thing? And so, as right now is a time of planning and preparation for the return of our students, staff, and families, and just trying to be prepared and to prioritize their well-being in that.
I mean, and the teachers are such key factors in helping children who are going to have their own suffering, and I imagine joy too coming back. And so, how we can help teachers, and I know that was one of the focuses that you two really wanted to talk about today. And we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to ask each one of you, how has your lived experience inspired you to create the work you're passionate about in the world? Because I certainly just recently met you, Heidi, but I've seen Lindy's passion in living color. So I'm going to start with you, Heidi. Can you tell us a little bit about, what was the spark that brought you to the work that you're doing today?
Sure. So I began this journey first as a parent. I'm the mother of two African American sons who live their life in brown skin. And my 4 year old was in pre K, and we began to notice some sensorial differences. We also noticed that he didn't like people in his personal space. And he had a teacher at the time who just loved on him and was able to still help him to thrive. But as he transitioned into kindergarten, that was not the case. And before we knew it, he was diagnosed with emotional behavioral disorder. And as a mom, I knew that once I researched, that didn't quite fit what I was seeing happen with my son, Jonathan. And so I began my journey of doing my own research on my own and learning about what was help because he couldn't self-regulate and manage. So that's what started me on my SEL journey. Also, some of the ability to read social cues and all of that. And I began teaching his teachers. And that was the beginning of my journey, going in for parent teacher conferences with principals and teachers in the schools that he attended and training them to help them to be able to better support my child.
So you really became a strong advocate, and there are so many children who have challenges with how they interpret sensations and can be overloaded very easily, but they're not always also diagnosed with disorders. And you were a strong advocate for helping the teachers, I imagine administrators as well, understand this.
Yes, and later we found that he actually had Asperger's. We transitioned to, we went through a series of things, even having to pull him out of public schools and homeschooling him for a while. And then when we finally found a school that we thought was suitable, where he and his brother could both thrive, we quickly discovered that he had Asperger's, and they immediately put in supports and partnered with me to help him and other students in brown skin where Asperger's and autism is not even considered.
And so that is also sometimes what I hate to say is this the structural racism that can exist. And so I can see that you've been a champion of that. And maybe this would be a time for you to tell us about your experience with the being an expert grounder with the organization that you're involved with. You want to say a little bit about that before I ask Lindy that same question?
Sure. So I was invited by Dr. Falami Prescott, because this is her brainchild, Listening for Justice, which is a series of sessions where we have people across the world actually come together across difference and get into small groups and have conversations about racial injustice and systemic oppression and liberation. And we know that these conversations can evoke strong emotions and sensations in the body, but we want to be able to give the participants tools that they can utilize to be able to first notice what's happening within them and then to be able to reset their nervous system, reset, and be able to stay in the game or stay in the conversation.
And have the dialogue that's so important for us all to have right now.
Yes.
Well, so thank you for sharing that. And can people learn more about that just by putting in the name, and it will pop up on the web, I imagine?
Yes, it's also known as L4J, and it's the number 4, not the word 4, listening for justice within.
L4J. I'm going to repeat that. So thank you for sharing that with us. So I'm now going to turn over to Lindy and ask you the same question. How has your lived experience inspired you to create the work that you're so passionate about?
I wanted to be a teacher since I was about 8 or 9 or 10 years old. I somehow convinced my neighborhood friends to come sit in my basement for school during the summer. Not sure how that ended up being okay, but they were all on board for it. So I wanted to be a teacher as long as I can remember. It took me a little while to get to education school, and when I finally did and became a teacher, the story of how I'm doing what I'm doing now is really the peeling of an onion for me. I now, work for social, emotional, and ethical learning. And looking back on my education career, my first teaching job was in a high school where I was forced to take the yearbook class as a condition of my employment. And knowing what I know now about social emotional learning and the building of community and how important relationships are, and working on a project-based learning, actually, I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. But all of those things really were happening when I was teaching this yearbook class and creating important relationships with the kids, some of which I still have to this day. I've become friends with these adults now. So I've had the experience of really seeing social and emotional learning later on in the middle school that I worked in, really being at the forefront of instruction for the school, even though it wasn't called that. Realizing how really that important that was for both academic development and creating a community of care for kids to have more well-being than they otherwise could have in schools.
Well, I'm just wondering, I didn't prepare this question. I didn't ask you before, but I have to ask. It just came to me. Did you ever think that what you would do in terms of preparing a curriculum for K through 12 would be international, like the C Learning program has become? Did you ever envision that for you when you had those friends in your basement and being the teacher?
No, ma'am, never in a million years would I have imagined that. And that's been a joy and a challenge of this work, is helping to develop with a team internationally usable curriculum that is intended for adaptation in the context in which it's being used. And that's where Heidi's and my work really comes together, I think.
And so I imagine that's also taking into consideration culture and different ideas that people have around the world about how best to cultivate the growing of our precious children. So I know that you've spent a lot of time and attention, and I just want to do a shout out to you, Lindy, because I have such great respect for the work that you've done in the world, having seen you firsthand be a great organizer, whether you're in Atlanta or India.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And look at it, Heidi's. Those of you that are on Facebook, Resiliency Within Live, could see her doing that nod. But now I'm going to ask you a question, because clearly the two of you really care about each other. How did the two of you come to work together with the social, emotional, and ethical learning program, C Learning? How did you come to work together? So do you want to go ahead, Heidi, and start and tell us a little bit about how this came to be?
Well, I actually was going to invite Lindy to talk about how she first connected with Kindezi.
Okay, yeah, I think that's
okay,
right.
Go ahead.
I think that's
go
right.
Ahead.
Yeah. So when we were still developing the K-8 curriculum, one thing that I thought would be, was a classroom teacher for 10 years before I came to doing this curriculum writing, which to me, as with that background of experience, to try to write curriculum without working with kids directly in front of me didn't make any sense. I guess I can't turn back time. I don't know what it would be like to write curriculum without being with kids, because that's what I did for 10 years. And so we were my team, we were thinking that it would be really cool if I could go and try out what we were writing together as we were writing it. Is it working? How are the kids responding to it? Does it fall really flat? How's the story? Things like that. And so we were connected through an organization here in Atlanta called Create. connected us to Rosalind Duff, who was teaching at the time at the Kindezi Schools. And Roz was running the after school program, and she had me come in once a week, and she and I co-facilitated these sessions with middle schoolers, 6th through 8th graders. I actually did it for 7 semesters. Even after we published, I went back to do it with them. So that's how I ended up at Kindezi, and I think how C ended up at Kindezi, and then Heidi can take it from there.
Yes, so although that work was happening in the background, I was actively vetting a variety of different curricula for social emotional learning. And I think maybe 8 to 10, I was actually teaching some of them myself with the small groups of kids, meeting with all different people, and there were just missing components. And it was very difficult for me to visualize those different curricula with the kids who we serve. And we have teachers who we definitely provide space for them to give feedback, and we were receiving feedback the current one we were using was not working. And so C-learning came up on that journey. And because it was free, that was one of the things that was appealing.
And that's very unusual, I want to add. I mean, that's been the amazing part of this project through Emory. Yes.
Yep. Because it was free and I could access it on the web, I could preview it easily. And so I was like, okay. And there was a difference in it, in fact, that it included systems thinking. Most of the other curriculum were simply about the self and social domains, but they lacked the systems thinking domains about the interconnectedness and common humanity pieces. And so that stuck out to me. So next was reaching out to Lindy, and we talked about, hey, this looks like it's going to work for us, but we also know that it's not perfect. So we integrated both the work of Zaretta Hammond's CRT, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, with the C-learning curriculum, and we started a pilot with a small group of teachers who were going to try it out in their classrooms.
Wow, that's a story. So you really brought your combined knowledge and to create something to really meet the needs of the children. And I think that's the other thing that sometimes happens is that schools will adopt something that's not working, but no one's ever, let's say, I should say no one, but sometimes there's not the evaluation process going on, and people continue things that aren't having the impact that they want to have for the kids and for the adults that are in the community too, which really gets my next question. What gains have you noticed in terms of the C program and the growth amongst kids and adults as a result of the pandemic? So what have you seen? What gains you've noticed in terms of social, emotional, and ethical growth?
Well, I was thinking about the adaptability of C-learning, and as Heidi said, it's not perfect. It doesn't have everything, but it does have adaptability and flexibility, which are two things that I think we've definitely seen in educators largely over the last year plus months of the pandemic. I've seen that in the trainings that I've done, that we've switched to virtual, and we're having to, be flexible and adapt to the virtual environment. I've also noticed that in the children, really since the pandemic's been happening, unfortunately, I missed that quite a bit. So with adults, I've noticed it seems like generally people are a little bit more caring with each other, and I think understanding of what's happening, that we possibly don't know what's happening with each other, even though we're seeing each other on the screen. And that's kind of what I would say for that. What about you, Heidi?
One of the things that I was thinking about is we took a risk because our pilot was disrupted by COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So we took a risk this school year by rolling it out and implementing it network wide.
That's right, because our last training was in February 2020, and we were all ready to do another one in like 4 weeks. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually implemented this network wide for the first time during the pandemic. And I have to say that I'm so thankful that we did. And what we noticed was teachers actually embracing the tools and the strategies. And I just think that being virtual maybe even may have created more space and time for them to internalize the practices themselves versus being in person with students. We also were able to see them utilize these tools themselves as well as with our students when having these authentic and heavy conversations about things that were happening in the world around them during this time. So that is one way that C learning was used, while we named specific skills just as we were teaching them how and guiding them in how to facilitate these questions that may arise from our students or our families. And also strengthen focus and attention. I will say that, like navigating learning at home with sisters and brothers over here, somebody's cooking a meal and parents may be working, and still having to stay focused and still learn. And the one additional thing that I also would say is increased willingness to take risk. We saw so much innovation and creativity during this time that I have to say, I do think it is because of that increased self-awareness and confidence that enabled them to be able to take those risks and being in relationship with amazing teachers that cared about them and loved them.
Well, this is so hopeful because we've heard so many stories about the challenges of going online, and you guys are being so hopeful about, oh my goodness, there's creativity and innovation. So as we're moving out, I know many people will be going in person, and I certainly have seen this in my own work where the online learning provided opportunities that we didn't have in person. So how can leaders continue to support these growing strengths that you saw emerge during the pandemic? So whichever one of you wants to go first with that, please just go ahead.
You can go ahead, Heidi.
Okay. I just know that during the pandemic, we focused really heavily on healing, well-being, and balance. And we need to keep that same energy around all three of those as we transition back into physical school buildings. And just understanding that for us, that social emotional well-being and responsive ways of being and doing are foundational for learning. Like you cannot just jump back into academics without laying those foundations that prepare us for feeling safe and prepare us for connecting and learning.
So can I just say something? You said something really important about feeling safe, because if anything, during the pandemic, many children and adults did not feel safe. So could you elaborate just a little bit, and either one of you, Lindy, too, what do you think it is about C learning that cultivated that growing sense of safety?
Well, Heidi,
I can't imagine I've stumped you two.
No, Heidi, if she had a continuing thought with that since she mentioned it.
One of the things that I always think about was the first time I went through C learning, and they have one learning experience called, I think it's creating or cultivating the compassionate classroom. And where you ask each individual student what makes them feel safe, or for it to feel loved, or even happy.
Yeah.
And then having to take that in as the guide in that classroom, and you're using their own words to help cultivate that space.
And that is, Elaine, as you know, a precursor to actually teaching resourcing. They do that in chapter 1, and then in chapter 2, we call it resourcing, and then we go further into it. That's a great answer. I was thinking on the leadership question. That's why I wasn't prepared to answer that one. I would add, you asked how can leaders continue to support these growing strengths? As Heidi said, this focus on care for each other. And there's been a lot of talk coming from leadership about self-care and taking breaks and, making sure you're taking care of yourself. And we educators can't do that unless the systems and the schools that we're in are actually truly supporting that and making space for that to be a possibility. So we can't really take care of ourselves without the support of the community. We as educators can't take care of ourselves without the support of our leadership and the systems that are in place in our schools. So allowing times for breaks, having real time for contemplative practice, if that's something that works for you, or exercise, or whatever you need, should be built in, I think, and continue to be if possible.
Well, and I think as you say that, I think it's really important because some people I've heard people say, "Oh, well, post-pandemic, I want it to go back to the way life as it was." But I think what I really am encouraging, and I think was what you both are saying, we can learn from what happened during the pandemic to make it better. And
Right.
these, I call them resiliency pauses, as you may know, that we have these times where we can, it's like pouring water on our well-being. And if we don't do that throughout the day, at the end of the day, we can be pretty depleted no matter what we're doing, right? And certainly I think teaching is one of the most amazing jobs, and certainly one that can bring you both. I imagine at times like, oh no, I don't know if I have the energy. So much has happened to the day during the day. And I see you, nodding, Heidi. I would really love to continue talking more about this. And if you can, I really want to explore this. How can schools in this post-pandemic era in the States, what can they do specifically? Lindy mentioned some things, but I really like to get your take in it, Heidi, because there's one thing to have the idea, and then there's a second thing to implement it. And what I've loved about C Learning, it's actually implemented the curriculum in all these different countries around the world by being flexible, adaptable, in thinking about the culture of each school, and in the case of C Learning, each country, which is quite a few now, right? So we'll talk more about that after the break. So I want to just let our Voice America listeners know that we are going to come back and have further conversation, and they're going to tell us even more things about what we need to attend to as we're creating what is a very hopeful post-pandemic culture that can actually continue this innovation and creativity that you have both shared with us that happened in your school, Heidi, during the pandemic. So we will be back in a couple minutes where we will have more conversation with Lindy and Heidi about how we can create these new environments.
All right, awesome job. All clear. Back in a couple.
Thank you. And so we're still on our Facebook Live, if there's anything the two of you want to say. But I am really excited personally about thinking about how do you create and cultivate these nurturing moments for teachers. So be thinking of that. Look at Lindy has a big smile, and so does Heidi on her face thinking about this right now.
Heidi has a lot of ideas. She's got planning for next year already. So
all right. Well, then when we come back, when we're all so our Facebook listeners, when we come back and we're online, we're on air, I would really like to hear about some of these things, because boy, this could change. This can be a game changer. And I think that's one of the things I loved about C Learning, because you started out, certainly when I started being a consultant, there was the idea, but the idea has been cultivating and growing because we continue to learn as we bring it to wider audiences of how to make it better, what worked, what didn't work. Like you're saying, like you said, Heidi, well, it wasn't perfect, but we could work with this and we could integrate some other things that you knew could make it even richer for your students. I was wondering, the Kindezi School, what is the word?
Kindezi.
Kindezi, rather. I'm sorry, Kindezi School. What does Kindezi mean? Is there a meaning of the school? Is it a particular district, or is it one of the special schools that happen around the country?
No, it's a Bantu word, and it means that in the womb, the child basically belongs to the mother, but after birth, it belongs to the child, the community.
We have to share that. That's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful word. So that's something that has to be shared, because wouldn't that be something if we can?
Look at that.
Yeah, it comes from this book, Kindezi, The Congo Art of Babysitting. And this concept was offered up by Dr. Asa Hilliard to the school's founder.
All right. Well, I need to get a copy of that book. So
right up your alley, Elaine. Kindezi has 3 schools. So Heidi is in charge of the network of the 3 schools here in Atlanta. And they're K-8 schools located in three different neighborhoods.
So are they part of the school system? Or I know I was trying to think of the word and I lost the word.
They're a charter network.
Charter, that's charter schools. That's the word I was trying to look at. So it's a charter school. Well, that's exciting, so exciting. And certainly, well, I come to Atlanta, maybe I can go visit the school.
I'd love it.
I'd love to come and see the school. That would be so much fun. I mean, you've taken I've been to other schools. Was it the Woodward School?
Mhm.
Buried it.
And that was exciting. Are we ready to go back,
Yeah, we're
Matt?
coming back in just a few seconds.
Okay, thank you. Look, we're just chatting away. We'll hear more music again, getting ready
Okay.
for the coming out of the break. See, look, it's half an hour's gone already.
It is indeed.
Look, it's fast. I hope you guys are less nervous now. You're doing well.
Thank you.
Man, I'm not hearing any music, just so you know.
I just wanted, while we're waiting, I know that my former student Travis is listening and watching on Facebook Live. So he was one of the young people I was talking about when I was talking about the yearbook class. So hey, Travis,
Right. Well, I played it, but I'm going to play it again for you. I'm going to turn it up loud.
Yeah, I can't hear anything. Yeah.
This is Resiliency Within with Elaine Miller-Karras. To reach the show during our live broadcast, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. That's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to elaine@resiliencywithin.com. Now, back to this week's show.
Hello, this is Elaine again, and I'm here with Heidi and Lindy, and we're having a wonderful conversation. And I want to, when we get started, we were talking at the break about the meaning of, and please say the word correctly because I'm going to mess it up. Could you say, Heidi, the name of the school? There's 3 schools, I understand, and they're charter schools. Could you say the name and tell us where it comes from?
The Kindezi School. So on the website, our website says a Bantu word, which describes the act by which a community educates, loves, and values every child. But the translation that when I first came into the organization, I knew that is that in the womb, the child belongs to the mother, and outside of the womb, the child belongs to the community and the world.
I love that. And so it's clear that you're cultivating this. And one of the ways that you're cultivating this and thinking about post-pandemic is how to support the teachers. So can you tell us a little bit more, Heidi? Lindy gave us the idea, but how are you actually going to make this happen, that we come back in this post-pandemic era with more supports for the teachers?
I was attending a session, the organization is called BEAM, Black Emotional and Mental Health Organization. And they said something that is so simple that said, ask people, have you eaten today?
Yeah.
Have you hydrated today? Have you had a moment to take a break and breathe? So in one of my check-ins with the principal, it was just simply looking at their schedule for next year and saying, where in here do teachers have a break? Where in here are we being intentional about making sure that they've eaten? Not like eating on the go or while you're trying to teach kids, and I know that sounds like something that's so simple, but I think that is a great starting point for any organization, is just looking at your schedule and saying, how are we helping to take care of our teachers and giving them time to take care of themselves? And another part of that is thinking about community care. I know we've been hearing a lot about self-care, but to be honest, sometimes that's difficult for us to take care of ourselves. And we need to be checking in on each other. So our teachers have coaching sessions. So if you have coaching time with teachers, making that space for a portion that we call care, where I'm just checking in on you, how are you doing as a human being, before we dive into data and what's happening in your classroom. And then one other thing that I would say is helping people to connect with, what does it feel like to feel well?
Mm.
We often spend a lot of time on, well, we know what unpleasant sensations we feel and how do we reset our nervous system. But what does wellness feel like in the skin that you are in? What does joy feel like in your body? Calm, peace, happiness. What does that feel like? So you can even not just know And what things are you doing that cultivate those feelings so that you can kind of return to that if you are having those moments? So those are just some simple things that I think that don't take a whole lot. And last thing, I know I keep saying last thing, flexibility. Leaders,
Yes.
I often hear teachers saying, I'm scared somebody's going to come in my classroom while I'm comforting a student, or I'm having a moment to have a circle so that we can address emotions in the room. And I don't want to get a bad mark on my observation. So
Mm.
leaders, please give teachers the space that they need to help create these compassionate classrooms in these healing spaces.
Well, you were, because when you talk about sensations, in the community resiliency model, which chapter 2 of C Learning has integrated the concepts of, the sensory piece is so important, because we've learned it's not only how you feel, but you've been talking about really the sensory system. Where does well-being land in your body? And I just recently had a conversation with Dr. Christina Bethel from Johns Hopkins, who's been one of the leading researchers about children and trauma. And she said, we have to help the children's body with well-being. And how do we help the children's body? We can, by the teachers. If the teachers can cultivate and pour water on their sensory system of well-being, it expands what they can not only do for themselves, but for their community of children and parents and other teachers, because we are all so interconnected, and that relationship piece is so very important. So I am going to be very excited to hear what comes forth as you come out of the sheltering in space within your school district. So that brings me to the next question. And what are some key aspects of cultivating and sustaining well-being? You've mentioned some, and resiliency among communities. But before we get that, resiliency can sometimes be a controversial word these days. And I tend to look at it as that cultivating the well-being inside and how we do that. So I'm just wondering if each of you could just give me briefly your definition of what does that mean to sustain well-being and resiliency. So I'll go ahead and talk to Lindy, ask Lindy that first, and I'll come back to you, Heidi.
A definition of cultivating and sustaining well-being.
Yes.
The English teacher in me is like a little panic that you just asked the definition. But I will say that I think cultivating and sustaining well-being is about is knowing that difficulties are ahead. That's part of life. And the ability that having strategies that we practice and grow that we can then access when we do hit those challenges. I mean, I sound like I'm verbatim reading what we have as the definition of resiliency and C Learning, which is partially your definition, Elaine, but it's really become like, that is really my definition now. And in doing this work, over the course of the pandemic, where I've been in my house with my husband and seeing just a few friends here and there, really has sustained me during this difficult time, and really being able to access the strategies and skills that I've learned from doing this work with C Learning. And I think amongst communities, Heidi and I've talked a lot about the key, and she probably will talk about this because we've talked about it a lot, but that one of the key factors of community resilience is self-awareness of who am I, how do I fit here, how am I affecting you, how are you affecting me, and what can we do together to increase our well-being. And so like having conversations about those things, whether it's just me and my household or my neighbors or my colleagues, being transparent and self-aware seems to be really important to that.
Great. It's wonderful. How about you, Heidi? What would you like to say about that?
Well, when I think about the word cultivating, I automatically think about gardening and helping something to grow. And the way that we help something to grow is by continuing to learn and to practice. So I think that's no different than any other thing with our wellness and our well-being. And not just learning things, but also continuing to learn ourselves. And who I am today might be different tomorrow. And how I'm feeling today might be different than how I'm feeling tomorrow. And what works today might not work tomorrow. So there is always this learning of self, and learning tools and strategies. And also know that we have within us tools that we already are using often, and don't see them as such, or that we've seen our grandmas or our mamas do, and we've done it. I don't know why I rock, maybe. But then I realized later, as I begin to learn the science, I'm like, okay, it's a form of grounding. So not just the tools that we read in books, but also thinking about what are some of our ancestral ways of being and doing that have been that passed down in families, grandmas humming, all those things, and embrace them and use them to make
Heidi, I love what you just said too. I've thought a lot about rocking because I think many of my listeners know I've been around the world taking these resiliency skills, these skills of well-being. And when people tend to get into their kind of zone of well-being, many people start to rock. They sometimes rock back and forth or side to side. And I've seen it in every culture. And it's been in every religious background, every ethnicity. And I also think it's about when most cultures that I've seen, what do you do with a baby? Babies have immature little nervous systems, right? And we might hold the baby in our arms and we rock our baby. It's like we have a muscle memory template inside of our nervous system that we tap into it when we touch into that well-being. So to me, it's one of the great things about our humanity all over the world that yes, there's differences to respect, but also interconnectedness of our common humanity that I think that we have seen, haven't we, in Sea Learning all over the world, as we have all been consultants to this program and seeing people, whether they're from Brazil or India or oh goodness, parts of Asia. Where's the place that I always, I will think of the country, but I mean, I just like, oh my gosh, there's people in that part of the country, the world, bringing these skills and these concepts of systems theory really into children and networks that are cultivating it, and they have similar language all over the world. It just makes me so excited. So anyway, I just love the way you both describe that, because I think the other thing I want to say is that with the word resiliency and well-being, it doesn't mean that we don't have a deep listen to our suffering, because out of our suffering grows oftentimes our ideas for well-being, and saying, oh my gosh, yes, I can hold the suffering, but I can also hold those strengths that you mentioned, Heidi, that have been handed down ancestrally from our grandparents, from our parents, then to us, and now that we hopefully can then transfer to our children. And to remember that that's something that's inside of us, which is so exciting to me to think about. So, okay, moving forward, I have more questions for you. So this has to do with your kind of relationship. What is collaborating with each other meant for you in your journey with Sea Learning, facilitator, an educator in person? So what's that, knowing the two of you, what's that collaboration meant? Because that's part of cultivating teachers too, isn't it? Is those relationships that we have with each other.
It's meant a whole lot to me. And that's not a very eloquent way of saying it, but that's just the truth. Heidi and I have, since our trainings for 2020 just got tanked by the pandemic, we made a point to speak to each other. I think every other week we have a call where we're thinking through things together about how could Sea Learning work here at Kindezi in this way? What would work well? What are the pitfalls? How, things like that, just sort of being thought partners about the material. And in the process, I feel like we have become friends, and we're becoming better friends as we do this work together. I've learned so much from Heidi about facilitating with responsiveness. I feel like I've always been a guide on the side kind of facilitator, but Heidi's even encouraged me to amp that up even more, because that's how real learning happens. And deep listening. I think this has also been a hell of a year for racial injustice in our country in particular. And this working across difference has been really meaningful to me. And I hope I've been a supportive friend throughout this time we've spent together.
Wow. All right. So over to you, Heidi.
I'm actually kind of tearing up.
Well, we notice tears here. We think tears are really good things. And I have a friend from one of the tribes in the Central Coast that called them sweet tears. We hear those kinds of words. So are they sweet tears?
They are sweet tears.
Yes.
And you asked that question, the first thing that came up, this comes from my leadership, the NPS questions like, do you have a friend at work? And yes to the content, but it means so much to have someone who I count as a friend embarking on this journey with me, where I really feel like our values and beliefs are aligned in this work. And that means so much. And because Lindy is the writer, it's so like that blows my mind sometimes. She actually like is the creator of this curriculum. And I know you did it by yourself, Lindy, but you have such a huge thumbprint on this curriculum, and the fact that I get to ask her probing questions because as I'm exploring cultural responsiveness, there are certain phrases or stories that are found within the curriculum where I want to know what was the intention, what was the thinking behind this, because it might be interpreted in this way in our setting. And that helps me to understand sometimes the science and the culture of origin that it came from, and that helps me to better adapt it for the communities that I serve. And also this piece across difference is has been very key for me as well.
Well, I think that, we talk about post-pandemic, well-being. I mean, you are living examples of that, because I can see that you are both thinking about how you're going to be collaborating even more so after you are back into the school system again, seeing children, and also with your fellow colleagues who are teachers.
Mhm.
And I know that just for me, and I'm not a teacher of children, but when just even meeting friends for the first time after not seeing them for a year, it's like been long, wonderful hugs, and just feeling that sense of well-being from that connection. I imagine that's going to happen. And I wonder about what that's going to be like for the schools as they get back into play again, or is it going to be a little bit of trepidation? Can I really do this? Can I really hug this person? Oh my goodness, yes, because touch is such a big part of who we are on this planet, of how we connect with others. But I love this idea of this buddy system with other teachers, and how important that will be as we come out of the pandemic and teachers get back into schools again. So is there anything more that either of you want to say about that? I have another question that I want to direct towards Heidi.
I'm good. I think you can direct the question to Heidi.
All right, I'm going to Heidi. Look at Heidi's there. Heidi has a big smile on her face right now, our listeners. So I think you can hear it in her laughter. So how does C learning support liberation or liberatory practices? Can you, and also it might be helpful, what does that mean, liberation? I think that if you give us a context of what that is, because not everybody may know what that means to you.
I'm gonna simplify and just say freedom. And how am I giving or supporting our students? I don't think I can give you your freedom. How can I support you in realizing that you have freedom in having a choice-filled life? How can I support you in helping you to realize that you have the ability to free yourself to experience a choice-filled life? Because I can't give you your freedom. That's something that you give yourself. And I think the way that C learning helps with that, and I'm going to start with self-awareness, is just the portion that we talked about earlier about being able, that body literacy, that's one component, being able to recognize the sensations and emotions that you're experiencing and feeling, and then you having the tools to be able to self-regulate. It helps you to respond instead of react. It creates that gap, that space, so that you can make decisions that lead to the desired outcome, your desired outcome that's good for you. So I think that's one piece of it. Also, one thing that I always have practiced the practices before teaching them to teachers is this observing the mind, is me being aware of my own thoughts, not just my feelings and sensations, but my thoughts. And even sometimes, what are the messages that I'm saying to myself? And when I think about self-affirmation and self-celebration as a healing practice, if I'm not aware then I can't make a different choice. I can't create a different narrative. I will say that one piece that I think that C learning is lacking is the component about cultural identity, that self-awareness piece. So because last year was the first year that we rolled it out, this year we'll be making changes, and we'll be bringing in supplemental materials the first couple of weeks of school for students to explore, who am I? What are my strengths? What are my passions? And what are some strengths and talents that I might not even know were deep inside of me? And we can use a phrase at Kindezi called genius awakening, where our teachers help to cultivate that which you might not even know was inside of you. So we're going to have to add that portion on because it's just not there. And also the systems thinking. In the curriculum, it's at the very end. We're going to bring it to the beginning this year with the who am I? And the systems thinking is so relevant with everything that's happening with current events. So what it helps you to really understand is that I'm not an island. I'm connected to a community and to a world that's bigger than myself. And I have the ability to impact change in my own life, in my community, and in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That says it all, doesn't it? Go ahead, Lindy.
I know we're wrapping up, but I just want to say what Heidi just mentioned in her lovely short speech there was that she covered so many of the the content topics in the chapters of C Learning, just as she was talking about positive self-talk, strengthening our attention and our self-awareness, our body literacy, and creating a compassionate environment, navigating our emotions. All of these are chapters in the curriculum. And the adding the identity work as well at the beginning is just beautiful, because C Learning is not an out of the box program there, which some places want an out of the box program, and that's fine, and they can do what they would like. But if you are a place that is really prizes responsiveness to cultural context, and you feel like this is a really great curriculum to use for those purposes, because you can bring in and supplement where you see the need to do that. If you find something's not in C Learning that you would like there. And I would just also say, well, check out, Heidi, we need to talk about what you guys are going to do at the beginning of the year, because we are working on the high school curriculum right now that we can perhaps weave that in a little bit differently when we publish that.
And I just kind of want to add what you're both are saying is that there is more research being done about positive childhood experiences. Even if the children we're caring for have had a bucket full of adverse childhood experiences, is those kinds of things that you're talking about, that strength base, which I've been such a believer in from my first, delving into creating the community resiliency model, is that we needed to spend more time with that. It's like watering that well-being and identifying what those strengths are and those historical strengths that get passed down to us as well, because they are so rich, and that really can be so embracing in how we see ourselves as we walk through the world. So we just have a couple minutes left, and I want you each to get the opportunity, right, to say one comment on what you want to leave our listeners with right now. All right, Lindy?
Oh, me first.
Comment.
I don't know. I have so many more things I could say. Really enjoying thinking about the garden metaphor in terms of cultivating social, emotional, and ethical learning, and building a more peaceful, just world. And when I think about my garden outside that I can see, it's extremely resilient. It's pretty hard to stop a plant from growing. And just imagine what we can do if we are able to, add the nutrients and add the water and make the environment better for those plants to grow. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Okay. And how about for you, Heidi? We got about a minute left.
There's good in every hood. Celebrate the journey.
Yes.
And know that your healing and your wellness is inside of you.
Yes. And so that couldn't be a better way to end our show today. And if people want to get a hold of, you can go to, can you give us the Emory information? And then I know you can connect people to Heidi quickly.
Sure.
What's the website?
Sure. You can find more about C Learning at clearning.emory.edu. That's the website. And our email address is clearning@emory.edu. And we're on social media as well. You can search us, clearning.
And so, and remember as we're ending today, that what else is true, that resiliency within that both of our guests have talked about and cultivate and are spreading throughout the world. And I want to do a deep bow to both of you and thank you for your wisdom in bringing it to me and to our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Heidi.
All right, nicely done. Good show. We're all clear.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Now we're still on Facebook Live, so you can even say more about it. I mean, I told you those last 4 minutes were going to come up really fast. I'm
They
going,
do go real fast.
They came
Real
up quickly.
Real fast. Yeah.
So, anything more you two lovely women would like to share with our group? Oh my gosh, you really got so much in. I'm so grateful to both of you. I've got a little buzz going down my arms right now because I feel so excited from hearing the hopefulness in both of you. So thank you. And I feel also some of those little moisture tears in my eyes, being grateful to both of you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. I got those tears too. I did just want to mention, I wrote down on my little notes here that my grandmother, Grandma Dort, is one of my resources. And she is, and just talking more to Heidi more and more about ancestral healing and ancestral knowledge it's causing me to look back more at her and her life and the things that she did to take care of herself and how loving she was. One of her favorite sayings was, whenever she arrived at like a party or someone's house, within the first 5 minutes, she would always say, well, if I had to leave right now, I've already had a fabulous time. And she just had this way of looking at the world that, like, you know, looking for the good and looking for the strength. And I've just been thinking a lot more about her as I've been doing this work. And I really appreciate that.
Well, I just love that you brought her in with us too. That there's something about doing this work that we can think about those important people of our past. I don't know, Heidi, if there's anything you might want to say.
I'm thankful for my ancestral lineage because I did not know that I came from a lineage of healers until I began to talk to my grandma and learn stories. So my grandmother was an herbologist. My great grandmother was the family doctor. And so as I continue to go back generationally, I'm uncovering more and more about who I am. And that's brought me to this place today.
Well, it sounds like, and you're a healer yourself. Oh my goodness. So this healing is continuing. I'm going to have to add about my grandma. Her name was Eva. And when she died, I used to call her Abuelita Linda, beautiful grandmother. And, but when she died, I had the privilege of doing her, of speaking for the family at her funeral. And so I went and I talked to my siblings and to others about her and about what she meant to them. I wanted to include everybody. And so almost every single person would say, Elaine, she liked me the best. And so I thought, what a brilliant grandma that she was able to convey to each and every one of us that we were her favorite. I thought, I have only one grandchild. I said, I hope I can convey the same because she was such a lovely healer as well, I have to say. So she had a very special, she was very Catholic, and she loved the Virgin Mary, and she would have the Virgin Mary in her bedroom with the rosary beads in her hand. And she had the prayer cards of all the family members who died in candles. And I'm looking at it to my right now because it's right there. And I told my family members when my mom died, because I said, I don't care. I only want one thing. I want the Virgin Mary. And now I have her prayer card and other family prayer cards. So continuing that kind of honoring of our past. So thank you for you both bringing that in right now so I could share that little story as well. So, well, I am going to be really excited to hear about what happens when school starts again. And so, they have renewed my show for 52 weeks. I think I have 37 weeks left. So maybe towards the end, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can have you come back and you can tell us what's happened with integrating some of these post-pandemic practices for bringing resiliency pauses to our precious teachers as they're coming back into the world. So thank you, both of you, for all the work that you do. All right.
Thank you, Elaine. It
All
was
right.
lovely chatting with you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I bet you you're not nervous anymore. Are you? No, you're not. When are you? No, you start talking about what you love and the
A
nervousness
little bit of a
flies
buzz,
away.
like you said, a little body
Little
buzz.
buzz,
Yeah.
little buzz. You were wonderful guests, so you
Thank
are
you.
definitely welcome to come back.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.